Patrol car video catches North Carolina officers making racial slurs.
This is the most exceptional and difficult case I have encountered in my career.
The Wilmington police chief finds himself a target. And an NYPD officer is arrested for using a chokehold.
The officer has a history of violating black and brown people.
And the Colorado governor appoints a special prosecutor to investigate the death of Elijah McClain. Plus, the rallying cry of justice for Breonna Taylor.
Because y'all saw that bogus police report.
Right now on Law and Crime Special Report, Keeping the Peace. It's Tuesday, June 26, 2020. Good afternoon. My name is Bob Bianchi. This is Law and Crime Special Report, Keeping the Peace. It is June 26, 2020. Unbelievable developments out of Wilmington, North Carolina, where officers were overheard in a routine check that another staff member was doing with regard to audio-video camera, making incredibly racist remarks, talking about wanting to start a civil war, using the N-word over and over again, and essentially indicating that they wanted to kill and set the black community back for decades. And this was brought forward, it was investigated, and right now we're going to listen to Police Chief Donnie Williams of the Wilmington Police Department, who was also critiqued in those videos amongst those police officers. Let's take a listen.
This investigation started as a result of a supervisor's routine inspection of a video from Officer Piner's in-car camera. No one told us about this. We discovered it on our own because we have processes and policies in place. After a review of the video, the supervisor discovered two conversations that Officer Piner had, one with Officer Gilmore and the other with Corporal Jesse Moore II. The conversations included disrespectful language, hate-filled speech, and referring to black people as the N-word. They also criticized me on this video. Several black officers within the agency and made negative comments about individuals outside of the agency. They made negative comments about our Black Lives Matter protest and were critical of our response. The 46-minute and 12-second conversations were brutally offensive and deserved immediate attention. You will find more details about the investigation in the public documents that we're releasing today. As a result, I have recommended that none of them be eligible for rehire in any position with the City of Wilmington. We will also notify the North Carolina Criminal Justice and Standards Commission on their behavior. The commission determines whether or not an officer can maintain their state certification to practice law enforcement. We will also consult with our District Attorney, Ben David, regarding their sustainability as witnesses, any biases they may have shown towards criminal defendants, and potential charges.
All right, I got an amazing panel of guests today. It's reunited and it feels so good. Gene Rossi, my old friend, we're back on camera again. DOJ, great prosecutor, tried many cases. Gene, welcome.
Good to be back, Bob.
Hey, Gene, you know what? We have a really special treat here. If you remember the Kellen Winslow case, you know, me and you could be critical of trial lawyers because we've been in that arena, but there was one that we were especially impressed by in the Kellen Winslow case, and that was Brian Watkins. I think that Brian Watkins should have put together everything we said about him in a sizzle reel for his website, but Brian's with us again. Hey, Brian, welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So listen, let me throw to you, Brian. The first thing that I would be doing as the prosecutor if this happened and these people were in my jurisdiction, I'd be taking the police department over, looking at all the internal affairs records of that department. This is too much of a cultural issue in my mind that they would feel so free to speak in this manner. And I would be revisiting every single case that they had. And in all likelihood, it'd be possible that those cases would be dismissed that were pending, and certainly look at those ones that were resulting in convictions. That's just a start with regard to why officers would fear culturally that they could say these things so out in the open and get away with it. It speaks to me of a big problem in the department. What do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, it's going to create such a problem because every defense attorney who's defended a defendant in that county is going to say, I want all those records. I want to retry my case now because the only evidence against my client was this officer's testimony. Now that I know this information, I want to redo it. So it's going to create a big problem within the criminal justice system as far as prosecuting cases are concerned. I mean, clearly that shows a bias on behalf of these cops. So we need the African-American defendant I want a retrial. I want his case to be reopened based on this new information that these officers contain these biases, this prejudice. They're racist.
Yeah, and Gene, listen, you come kind of down from that neck of the woods, and as a former prosecutor, we've talked so many times about the pride we took as prosecutors and the work that we did, and always believing we were pursuing justice and working for our victims. But that all presupposes that the people, our investigators and detectives, are giving us accurate information that's unbiased, untainted, and done for the right reasons. What are your thoughts, both with respect to what you see here and from a federal perspective, because you were a federal prosecutor? Do you see any intervention of the feds in this situation?
I don't see any intervention of the feds in this case in Wilmington, but I can tell you this right now. I have a case, I don't want to get into the details, where I'm alleging that a detective repeatedly committed perjury in presenting materially false information to a grand jury that indicted my client. But what I can say about this, and I agree with Brian, this now triggers a famous case called Giglio, Giglio. You're trying to get bias, prejudice, confirmation bias about a detective. You're trying to find out whether they've done this before. So this is a treasure trove. And if I was in Wilmington, I would ask for every recorded encounter that guy had, every non-recorded encounter, for God's sakes. This is just absolutely disgraceful. And last thing I want to say is this. If that's what they say when they don't think they're being recorded, my goodness gracious.
Well, I'll tell you something, guys. I was on a commission when I was prosecutor with the Attorney General's office, and we instituted a rule, and this is a long time ago. So sometimes it surprises me in these jurisdictions that they're so far behind, and why I think we need national best practices, where if you were caught lying as an officer, getting to Giglio, Gene, that was stapled to your record, and every defense attorney was entitled to know, whether it be in an administrative investigation, whether it be any kind of official action whatsoever, that this officer has been caught and found and verified to have lied. It was a career ender because we rely on the truthfulness of our officers. Why is that not a national standard, Brian?
That's a good question, and it should be, because people understand that often in many cases, there's only two witnesses. There's the defendant's version, and then there's the officer's version. And when you have a he said, she said versus an officer, it's very difficult to win that case, because the public does give officers a lot of credibility and the benefit of the doubt, and maybe they even should. But when we find out information like this, it takes us back so far, where if we can't trust the officers who are out here trying to keep us safe and protect us and rely on their testimony when they make arrests, our whole criminal justice system falls apart.
And I'm going to say it over and over and over again. When I was prosecutor, this is the messaging to the police. Effective internal affairs, effective regulations like this help the good officers. And for those officers who are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, maybe you can get retraining, or if not, you get them out and keep them out. This is for job survival and in the interest of justice. I got to move on, though, real quick. Gene, I'll go to you first. This is this chokehold case out of New York. Now, let's remember, it's been banned to do a chokehold in New York for years, and it's now signed into law, became an executive order by the governor just the week before this. But yet, still again, we see another body cam video of an officer engaged in a chokehold. Let's take a look at some of that video, as well as the family's preacher's reaction to it.
All right, I got just stay back. Stop blocking the view. Well, I'm just let him go. He just shit. Yo, stop talking him, bro. You guys can record. Yo, stop talking him. Yo, he's talking him. Let him go, bro.
Got him. He's out. He's out. He's out. Look. Back up. Officer. Look at this. He's out. Look. Yeah, fuck you. Fuck you, Alfredo. Fuck you. Fucking. Look. Yeah, fuck you. Fuck you, Alfredo. Fuck you. Fucking.
Fuck him. Yo, he's choking him. Let him go. Fuck you. We're not doing nothing wrong. We're listening to music. We're listening to music. They fucking come and choking us. Fucking fuck. Why is he the only one getting arrested? Yeah, right.
Ricky, the reason why we were late getting here, Ricky is still suffering from the abuse, the brutality, the chokehold that this officer did to him. It was insult to injury that the district attorney's office did not notify him or his family that the officer was going to be arrested today. That officer should have not gotten released on his own recognizance. That officer should have been held with other criminals in the justice system. Because on that day, that's what he acted like, a criminal. He violated the law, and he should be held to the fullest account of the law. The officer has a history of violating black and brown people. He has a history of causing police brutality and police misconduct in New York City. So he should be behind the bars, not celebrating or happy because he's released on his own recognizance.
Now, this officer has been charged with strangulation and attempted strangulation under New York state law. He was, in fact, bailed out. Gene, I go to my old tactical operations captain, Jeff Paul. I think you actually know him or been on set with him a couple of times. And we talk about this overwhelming force. And I understand about officer safety, but it bespeaks of a culture where it's been banned for years to use this chokehold. It's been thrown out in the week just before this. The George Floyd protests, everything that's going on. There's 3 officers there. You even hear somebody say on the tape, he's out. He actually passed out as a result of this. What in your mind is happening, even from the standpoint if job survival is an instinct you possess and your liberty is an instinct that you possess, that these things continue to occur?
I blame it on training, and I'm going to blame prosecutors here, Bob. Here's one of the major reasons why you have a culture that exists in certain departments, because 90% of police officers, I've worked with them, they're good people. You have the 10 to 15% that just don't get it. And the reason they don't get it is training, training, training. Prosecutors need to go and train these police officers on how to engage in de-escalation. They need to be trained on when to use proportional force. I repeat, proportional force. You don't need to kill a fly with a bazooka. You don't need a chokehold on somebody who's on the ground with their face to the ground. You have to train these officers. And when I see these, I see officers that just don't know what the heck they're doing.
Yeah, Brian, to that point, and now we have such mad respect for you, so I'm going to put you in that difficult spot again. Now, this officer clearly did something. He may have a prior disciplinary record from what we're listening to. There definitely are maybe cultural issues within these departments. But the one thing I love about the George Floyd case, if there's a thing to love, and you know what I mean by that, is that it will now start putting the onus on the other officers that are there, that if you see something that's inappropriate, you are responsible, or if you allow it to continue, you can be an accomplice as well, in my mind. And I think that's a very big development. But as a defense attorney, Brian, what are you thinking about in terms of how you would strategize representing this officer who's now charged with these strangulation offenses?
Again, this is a very tough case. Why? Because it didn't seem like the chokehold was necessary. I mean, there was 3 other cops outweighing the guy for probably about 100 pounds each. He wasn't really being combative. I mean, the situation was completely under control. What was the need for that chokehold? It's going to be a tough case. He can't really rely on his training and say, oh, I was just doing what I was trained to do, because in New York, you're not supposed to use the chokehold. That's not how you're trained. So why he was using the chokehold is going to be a big problem for him. What has been the get out of jail free card for officers all this time, ever since, the Rodney King case, I can even go back to the Detweiler case that started the Watts riots back in the 70s, is I feared for my safety. How is this officer going to be able to say, I feared for my safety of myself and the other officers that were present, looking at that video? That's going to be a very, 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 very tough case. I don't know what he's going to say. I mean, the kid weighed about 100 pounds, 3 officers, and to say that was necessary, boy, that's a tough argument.
Yeah, it is. And that's where defense lawyers, though, have to make arguments in order to represent their clients. Gene, I will go to one of your points. I think a look has to be done with regard to the prosecutors as well. When they see stuff like this, they do what occurs here. They make the charges. That sends the message. We got to go to break. We'll be right back. Elijah McClain, by all accounts, a gentle boy, young man, plays the violin for animals that were getting ready to be surrendered, never had a violent history at all. You see a picture of him up there right now. Well, the governor has appointed a special prosecutor in this particular case. You may remember this. This is where he's walking, on the street. He's not committed any kind of crimes. He's got a ski mask on, and it's in the summertime, and he's listening to music and waving his arms. So that's what got the suspicion of the police to have this encounter. The encounter wound up deadly and brought down chokehold case again. He was administered ketamine, supposedly to calm him down. At least that's the official story. And then ultimately dies and suffers a heart attack. So let's listen to the family's reaction as the special prosecutor picks up this case once again.
Don't you think if he really had grabbed someone's gun, we would see fingerprints that had been lifted from the gun?
Did you find any evidence that corroborates the officer who said he reached for the gun?
I had no evidence to contradict that.
Shani McClain is Elijah's mother.
They murdered him. They're bullies with badges. He wanted to heal people. He was a massage therapist. He not only healed others, but he healed himself. He was able to accept love and give love.
Well, Brian, I'll go to you first on this. The first thing as a prosecutor, and when you're evaluating a case, you have to look at the family and social history of all the people, the police officer's history. There's nothing in this young man's record that would indicate anything other than a gentle soul. And I will go to this point, and Gene, I'm going to talk to you about it too. But first to you, Brian, the mere fact that you, quote unquote, may have gone after an officer's gun or may have resisted arrest doesn't mean that you go into overwhelming force on an individual of that size. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. And, that has been the get out of jail free card for police for so long. He went for my gun. There's never any evidence of that. And all we have is the officer's word and testimony. But you look at this young kid's background and say, is it likely that this guy was going to turn into a cop killer, a murderer, that he was going to take that officer's weapon and kill those officers? And it's unbelievable. I mean, clearly this is a case of excessive force that caused the death of this young man. And
Gene, to Brian's point, the fact is to get a gun from an officer out of a holster, they're specifically designed for that not to happen, at least the holsters that I'm aware of. So why would the prosecutor previously looking at this case saying, well, I can't tell you one way or the other? Isn't the bottom line that the force itself was excessive?
It goes to proportionality, what I said before. You don't kill a fly with a bazooka, no pun intended. But I want to address something that comes up more often than you would think, and it has happened in my case. When police have an incident that they're embarrassed about, dramatically embarrassed about, is that police report accurate? And I have a case now where I have overwhelming evidence, in my view, that an officer wrote a false police report to cover up something he had done. And what that person, that cop did in that report, compared to what the victim looks like and his habits and his characteristics, it just doesn't make any sense.
Right. You got to try to make things make sense based upon people's prior history. That's for sure. Gene and Brian agree with you both. Okay, Breonna Taylor. I mean, this is the other case that we've been doing on Keeping the Peace. We've been following this case where there was a no-knock search warrant. They were looking for somebody else there. She is 26 years old, an EMT. And then eventually shots are fired. An officer fires 10 rounds. And the poor young woman is killed. Let's listen. There are no officers that have been charged right now, but I want to throw to Breonna's boyfriend and their attorney. Let's take a listen.
I know you ain't heard a lot from me, if anything, but I just want to let y'all know I appreciate all the love and support for me and most definitely for Breonna. She would appreciate it too. Breeway.
We are here at the Capitol in Kentucky to declare that Breonna Taylor will not be disrespected. That Breonna Taylor will not be unprotected. That Breonna Taylor will not be neglected.
because her life matters. Breonna Taylor life matters. Breonna Taylor life matters. Breonna Taylor life matters. Nobody's paying attention to it. They're trying to sweep it under the rug. And you all in Kentucky know they're trying to sweep it under the rug because y'all saw that bogus police report.
Now, guys, I got 90 seconds. I'm not sure of all the facts in this. None of us are, and that's a very important factor, and I think we would all agree. One of the officers was actually shot as well. Now, while she was not an intended, target of this investigation, officer gets fired, gunshot happens, and just may go wild, may go off, may be scared. Brian, how are you representing him? Real quick.
Well, you got to say he was fired at. They executed a no-knock search warrant. A judge says we have probable cause to believe criminal activity is occurring. We received fire. It is lawful for me to return gunfire, and that's what I did. Unfortunately, she was hit and killed.
Yeah, Gene, what do you think about Brian's assessment?
I totally agree. When you get approval for a no-knock search warrant, that means the judge has concluded that inside that apartment or home, there's violent activity. So that gives them a pretty good defense if they go in and they think there's violent activity.
Yeah, and we know it's always, of course, a great tragedy when an innocent person is killed in a situation like this. But that, I agree with you guys, would probably be the defense here. If you were prosecutors, both of you right now, would you be bringing charges based on the information you know right now, Brian?
You can't. You can't, because he was, officers were shot, gunfire was exchanged in both directions. So that's a tough one.
Gene, what do you think, real quick?
I agree. And Mr. Walker, I think, was one of the ones who shot a police officer in the leg.
Right. Well, guys, listen, it's been an inestimable pleasure to have two professionals, two great trial lawyers on the show. You have been watching the Law and Crime Network special report, Keeping the Peace. I'll be back next week. Have a great weekend. Thanks for watching.